So what's next, Labour? Killing the firstborn? I'm being flippant, of course. Frankly, I don't want to give them ideas. Don't want them to go all Book of Exodus on us, do I? People fleeing violence, persecution, and dictatorship. That's the latest target of the soulless, dead behind the eyes hacks who happen, sadly, to run this country. In their 15 disastrous months in power, they went to war with pensioners. Remember that? They went to war with disabled people. And now they're going to war with refugees and asylum seekers. Now, here's the truth, right? This is the truth. The shambolic mess we are supposed to call a government is in a state of panic. And you can see why. According to the polling, 82% of voters are dissatisfied with their performance. Just 1 in 10 or so are satisfied with how they're doing. By the way, that's about the same as the number who think the Americans faked the moon landing. This is the most unpopular government in recorded history, less popular than other governments have managed after being in power for many years. That is impressive, by the way. You've got to hand it to them. That takes real talent, skill, imagination, ingenuity. They boxed themselves into a corner at the last election by ruling out lots of tax hikes on the rich. And they thought that was so clever at the time. They were like, oh, look at us, we're masterful strategists. Now, what they were going to do now, given the disaster this country's in, is break their stupid election promise and not increasing income tax, however, by hiking the basic rate, rather than, for example, doing wealth tax, etc. They realised that would make them even more loath, if that's possible. Let's see what they manage. So their budget due next week is in ruins. That is why, that's the context for why Labour is now pressing a big red shiny button labelled distract everyone by trying to make them hate foreigners. It is the button disastrous failed governments invariably press when it's all gone to shit. Now, according to Sky News, the clampdown on refugees proposed by this government makes the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, the new hard woman of British politics. Interesting, isn't it? That our media defines a politician as hard and tough if they go after people who are struggling, people who don't have a voice. You see, notice this. Taking tough decisions, according to our politicians and media, never means taking on the bankers who plunge Britain into disaster. It never means, I don't know, taking on big corporations, making shed loads of profits while avoiding tax on an industrial scale. No, it always means punching down, not up. We'll talk about the government's proposals and their lies and their absolutely unbelievable hypocrisy. But I want to be fair here, because it's not true to say they've not won praise. They have won the much coveted Tommy Robinson endorsement. Well played, Labour. That's the far-right thug/grifter support in the bag. He's an extremist, of course. He's been imprisoned for multiple offences. So we're clear, he says the Overton window has been obliterated. Well done, Patriots. Now, the Overton window, for those who don't know, means the ideas and policies that are seen as acceptable or mainstream at any given moment in time. What Stephen Yaxley Lennon, whatever his actual name is, means here is that Labour have shifted the political debate in the direction of the far right. And I never thought I'd say it, but he's absolutely right. Nigel Farage tweets, meanwhile, the Home Secretary sounds like a Reform supporter. Well, no wonder the guy's chuffed. As they say, racist Christmas comes round earlier every year. Here's Reform MP Danny Kruger, who is also delighted.
I welcome the rhetoric that the Home Secretary has announced. In fact, I recognise the rhetoric of the Home Secretary today. We have our plan for restoring justice. She's announced a plan to restore order and control. But before she puts in her application to join Reform UK, and I very much welcome her doing so, can I just draw out the difference? Can I draw out the difference?
Bless you, Savannah. Oh, look at you. You're getting invited to join Nigel Farage's party like all the cool kids. Bet you could only have dreamed of scaling these heights when you got involved in politics. Is this what you got politics for, Shabana? Is this what you always dreamed of achieving? Really? Now, I've been sifting through far-right Twitter, so you don't have to. I had a hazmat, so you're handy. Had a good scrub after. Now, the extremists who tweet deport, along with extremely racist statements and ambitions, they're in absolute ecstasy because they think they are now winning the argument. They think this means that even more extreme ideas start to look less extreme. And I'm sorry, but they are right. Now, let's go through some of the proposals and why they're not just cruel, but they're based on lies and are self-defeating. Now, one proposal briefed by the government to the media was to steal the jewellery of asylum seekers. Well, let's not beat around the bush here, because I know what you're thinking, and it is what lots of people start thinking. They start immediately thinking about the Nazis. That's what they start thinking about. They start thinking about the Nazis. Now, clearly, even Labour decided that going full Nazi was going down like a cup of sick, and clarified they would not steal jewelry at the border. What a clarification. But what they're planning is to seize assets. Now, I'm sure, of course, they could go through the extensive share portfolio of Afghan refugees. Maybe they could expropriate one of those Porsches Iranian refugees bring on small boats. The fact is, this was not briefed because it was practical. They briefed it because they think it appeals to the most sadistic instincts that voters have. What they're going to do with their plans is to put asylum seekers in limbo. So if they get their asylum applications accepted, they will have to wait 20 years until they can apply for permanent residency, with reviews every 2.5 years. So when people complain about a lack of integration, how does this help? How does this help exactly? How does this help integration? Making refugees visitors, constantly waiting to be kicked out for 20 years, for 2 decades, unable to put down roots, make plans, make this place their home? What's that going to mean for integration? I mean, that's what people complain about, isn't it? Why won't people integrate? What's going to happen now then? You know, if they're working, part of a community, they've settled down with a family, they can be uprooted and kicked out. If the government decides where they're from has suddenly become a safe country, which is often just complete bullshit, by the way, and transient. But in any case, why? Why, when they've settled here, they've been here for years and made this place their home, why would we want to do that? It could mean that their children could be teenagers, have only known this country, Britain, as their own country, and then be forcibly removed, that is, dragged into a van, incarcerated, and then deported to a country they know nothing about. That's what Labour's planning to do. Now, that will make those people's lives miserable. It will not improve a single person's life here. Indeed, it will cause distress and shock amongst their friends, neighbours, and communities. The former Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, asked the Home Secretary for an assurance that no child would be placed in detention under the policy. And the Home Secretary declined. I think we know what's happening here. Kids are clearly going to be incarcerated. As the Labour peer Alf Dubs, who fled Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia as a Jewish refugee in 1939, puts it, the Home Secretary seeks to use children as a weapon. So when people who have been accepted for asylum suddenly have their asylum rejected, having lived here for years, 15 years or so, the government plans as well to pull any financial support. In practice, this will just mean more people homeless. It'll mean more people rough sleeping, more people being exploited, more people turning to crime. Is that going to make this country a better place? Is that going to answer people's anger and resentment about people arriving in this country? How? You see, here's the point. This is all based on lies. Shabana Mahmood says, we have become the destination of choice in Europe, clearly visible to every people smuggler and would-be illegal immigrant across the world. She says the UK has become the golden ticket for asylum seekers. She is lying through her teeth. There were more than twice as many asylum applications in Germany last year, 1.5 times as many in Italy, Spain, France. Detected irregular arrivals are significantly higher in all of those countries, except for France. We don't know what those figures are because they don't publish them. Adjust for population, and the UK sits 17th on the table of its former EU partners for asylum applications. We're in the bottom half. Shabana Mahmood denounces how divisive asylum has become in our country when it's the sorts of myths and deceit that she's peddling that's fueling the fury. And also know this, there's about 120 million people who've been violently driven from their homes on the face of the earth. The majority of those people stay in their own country. The minority of those who leave their own country overwhelmingly stay in neighbouring countries. It's often the poorest countries on earth, and countries which are much poorer than our own, which have to do the most to look after refugees. The tiny proportion that end up in Britain are often those who speak English, people who have family ties, community ties. I know that because I've interviewed those refugees. I've interviewed, for example, the Afghan teenager whose father was shot dead by the Taliban. He spoke perfect English. Afghanistan, remember that country? It's a country we've been involved in a terrible way, by the way, since the 19th century. And we backed the Mujahideen as they waged their jihad against the Soviets in the 1980s. Didn't end up very well, that one, did it? And then we were involved in a 2-decade-long armed conflict, which ended disastrously. And we just, That's the second highest source of asylum seekers, Afghanistan. What? And now we just pretend that's got nothing to do with us, do we? I've interviewed Darfuris who've watched their, fellow villagers burn to death and, terrible traumas like that. These are examples of people who they have people who live here, community ties, they speak English, they can be part of society. That's why they come here. They don't speak French, they don't speak Italian, they don't speak German. And that's why you get that tiny proportion, tiny slither of the world's displaced population coming here. These are the facts. That this government's not interested in facts. Seriously, wait for this part. According to the New Statesman, this isn't us tacking towards public opinion. We really believe it, says one Mahmood ally, echoing Tony Blair's old line about public service reform. As the child of migrant parents, they say, the Home Secretary has an authentic outrage over illegal migration. Oh, really? Is that so? Let's just listen to Shabana Mahmood a few years ago.
No specific plans regarding amnesty for undocumented workers. Myself personally, as a Labour backbench Member of Parliament, I do support a general amnesty for all people who are already in the country so they can regularise their status and start playing a full part in British society. But that will have to be alongside other documentation measures as well. That is not official Labour Party policy yet, but myself and a group of other Labour MPs are continuing to make the argument.
So just to be clear there she is saying she's calling for, indeed lobbying for, a general amnesty. A general amnesty of people who arrived here through irregular routes, the people she now describes as illegal migrants. Back then she was rightly using the term undocumented workers rather than illegal migrants. So if it's true, as her allies are briefing to the New Statesman and other publications, that her heritage as the child of migrant parents causes her to have authentic outrage over illegal migration, why was she campaigning for an amnesty of undocumented people, illegal migrants, a few years ago? Why didn't she feel that outrage back then? When did this outrage, based on her family history, suddenly manifest and appear? Exactly. When exactly? And why? I'll tell you what's actually happening here. Shabana Mahmood, you see, like her colleagues on the Labour front bench, doesn't actually believe in anything. Nothing tangible, nothing meaningful, except power for its own sake. This is the same Shabana Mahmood who went to pro-Palestinian rallies shouting about Palestine being free, and now is in charge of the law which locks up elderly people holding placards opposing genocide. There is no principle. There is no belief. There is no group of people, however vulnerable, that Labour politicians will not throw under a bus in order to stay in power for its own sake. That's why her leader, Keir Starmer, campaigned for free movement when he was standing to be leader of the Labour Party after the votes of Labour members. At the time, he denounced the hostile environment for migrants and reprimanded his party for being a bit scared of making the positive case for immigration for quite a number of years. He was actually criticising Corbyn's leadership there for not being pro-migrant enough. And then he ends up as Labour leader, raiding the language of Enoch Powell, talking about Britain becoming an island of strangers and declaring that the damage immigration has done to our country is incalculable. These people believe in nothing, zero, zilch, except power for its own sake and all its trappings. That's why they were lapping up all those freebies from those rich donors. That's what they're after. With that in mind, thank goodness for Zach Polanski, leader of the Surgeon Green Party, who took on this shameful bullshit last night on Newsnight.
Every single Labour MP needs to look to their conscience.
Why?
The interview we just heard, you said it yourself. The question was, you never told anyone when they voted they were voting for this. This is extreme, this is inhumane, and it is a government of cowards. Rather than take on the powerful, because the issue here is not immigration, it's inequality. They went for pensioners, they went for the disabled, and now they're going for people who are fleeing war and conflict. I am furious. So many people are furious because this is a totally unconscionable way to deal with things. And how dare the minister say we are an open, tolerant country? How dare she come tonight to Newsnight and talk about compassion at the same time they're talking about seizing people's assets? I am a child of Jewish ancestry. I am Jewish. We have seen this with Nazi Germany. We are seeing it in 2025. This government need to hang their heads in shame.
He's absolutely spot on. Labour are cowards. They're wimps. They're kicking pensioners and disabled people and asylum seekers because they're too scared to take on the powerful. There is nothing strong about going after those whose lives are already hard. Real courage is taking on the powerful, the people with money and resources and a platform to fight you back. And they're scared of Nigel Farage, who uses migrant bashing as a smokescreen for policies which would favour millionaires like him and the other millionaires running Reform UK. Now, in the latest YouGov poll, the Green Party are up 2 points on 17%, about 3 times as much as they won in the general election last year, where they came second behind Labour in 39 seats. They're drawing equal with the Tories, and they are just 2 points behind the Labour Party. Listen to this, by the way, with that context, from Channel 4's Krishnan Guru-Murthy interviewing Labour MP Mike Tapp.
It's actually a real admission that your bigger project has failed. You know, the truth is that you could stop all the illegal immigrants, you could deport 1 million people, and Britain would still be unequal, poor in places, lacking in opportunity, divided, all the things that are causing so much disgruntlement at the moment and the blaming of migrant communities.
Not at all. There's a valid concern around lack of integration and lack of contribution from some that are here. So we've got to make sure that that's rectified. If we rectify that, then people will stop blaming others. But of course, there's a lot to do on the economy, on the cost of living, on the NHS, on policing, and we're working hard on all fronts.
I mean, if you were providing good public services and economic opportunity and more equality, people wouldn't be pointing the finger at immigrants, would they?
Look, there's no doubt that we've inherited an absolute mess. The public services were on their knees. The NHS was ruined. The buses weren't running. There's not enough police on the streets. We're already making progress on all 3 of those issues and more, and we're going to go further. It's only a year and a half into our first term of our, hopefully, decade of national renewal.
And what do you say to your colleagues and the Green Party who say this is cruel and racist?
Oh, well, it's certainly not.
Well, the questions there are spot on. Bashing refugees won't do anything to lift a single person out of poverty, or stop exploitation of workers by their bosses, or fix the public utilities our government's flogged off to profiteers so they could become cash cows for shareholders rather than being running the interests of the people of this country. The government can't, or more specifically, won't fix people's actual problems, so they're resorting to bashing foreigners because they have only fear rather than hope on offer. Now, I personally think those sorts of questions being asked there by Channel 4 wouldn't be asked if it wasn't the Greens surging. That is shifting the Overton window. That is the ideas and policies that are seen as mainstream or acceptable at any given time. To anyone still supporting Labour, I ask you this. What is your red line? What's your limit? They've kicked pensioners, they've kicked disabled people, and now they're kicking people fleeing violence, persecution, and dictatorship. They've refused to tax the booming wealthy properly, leaving this country in a mess because they're in the pockets of wealthy elites. The one thing they were supposed to do was be competent, the grown-ups in the room, we were told. Remember all that? But they've been a chaotic mess, constant U-turns and crises, and a lack of any direction whatsoever. Now they're going to try and blackmail you by saying unless they adopt reforms policies, reform will come to power. Does that make any moral or logical sense to you? We must become reform to stop reform? Consider the fact that across Europe, mainstream political parties have tried this over and over again. They raid the rhetoric and policies of anti-migrant parties, and all they achieved was legitimizing those parties and boosting their support, shifting the conversation exactly onto the territory they wanted. The truth is, this government's toast. Without an alternative that actually answers people's problems, we are going to end up with Nigel Farage at number 10. Now, the Greens are saying we can make hope normal again. We can actually take on the powerful rather than attack those whose lives are already so hard. Do we really think we have to settle for despair, fear, and decline forever? I actually think this country's got so much talent, so many resources, so much potential, and I actually think we deserve so much better than this. Please like and subscribe, leave your thoughts and your comments. Help us take on this dire media landscape, which has, for a start, fed people with hatred and lies about refugees and migrants for so many years. That's why we're in this mess, rather than actually building a different sort of society. You make it all possible. Patreon.com/OwenJones84. I keep saying I'm finishing my book, The Fall of the West. When I do that, I can focus on my videos. But yes, thank you for making all this possible. And we're reaching millions every month because of you. Share the video. I'll speak to you in a bit.